Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Nicole with Made from Scrap, and I want to wish you all a very happy new year. And we are just going to play today. I hope you enjoy this New Year's Eve crop, and we're just going to take a shot at playing around with some of our crafty materials. I have pulled out some of these distress embossing glazes that I have. These are the ones that I have. I have this lumberjack plaid, this uncharted mariner, and a couple of others that I'm just going to play with. I'm going to be using this embossing dabber and an embossing pad that I have, and then I have pulled out a bunch of little odds and ends to just play around with. So let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is use my little embossing dabber, or you can use your pad, and I put that embossing glue essentially onto my paper element there, and then I'm going to sprinkle the powder on top of it, and then I'll use my heat embossing gun to go ahead and heat up those little particles of plastic to melt them, and you can see that it gives it a nice shine. I have a couple of these that I've done. I've used my Sizzix die that I got from Country Craft Creations, which is the little pots. So I went ahead and decided that I want to put a different color. In this case, I'm using the Uncharted Mariner, which is a blue embossing glaze. And I'm just making a little bit of a decorative edge. I'm using a dry brush in order to get off the excess where I don't want the blue glaze onto it. And then I'll use a couple of pop dots behind this rim to give it a little bit of a dimension there. And I've just taken a look at it. I just decided I didn't want it quite so long, so I went ahead and used a pair of scissors to cut it down. Now I'm going to be playing around with a couple of different elements to just englaze on different things. This is a little chipboard piece that I had in my stash, and again, I just heat it up. So keep in mind it's translucent. So one of the things is you don't see the color as well of the powder if you have a darker color behind. So that was a brown chipboard element. So I'm going to go ahead and show you here on a layered piece, which is a thicker piece of paper that has a glossy finish to it. That same color being used again. This is a saltwater taffy. And now you can see that color on it versus the brown background from that chipboard piece before. I started using a little embossing pen there, and that was the black one out of my stash. So I said, oops, let me go ahead and clean that off with a baby wipe. Now I went ahead and layered up that Uncharted Mariner on top of that saltwater taffy color. And you can see that it layers quite nicely. It does change the color a little bit, but it's nice that you can still see through it because these are all transparent. Now, I'm going ahead and trying out using embossing glaze and some of my crayons in this case on a paper mold. So this is the craft mold. Paper clay, it's called, paper clay. And then I'm pulling out some of my stamps that I have. This is the Pets stamp from Echo Park. And I'm just going to go ahead and use some of my archival ink to stamp down a couple of those little fish. And then I really need to play around a bit more with these distress crayons. I didn't particularly like what was going on here, so I decided to just cover it up basically with some a bubble stamp, what looks like water to me. So went ahead and used again that Uncharted Mariner. So it seems like I'm going for kind of an orange and a blue look. And I'm just going with the flow here. I only have my, let's see, 6 different colors of distress embossing glaze in my stash. So I'm just using what I have and playing around with it. This is the first time that I'm playing around with these embossing glaze actually. So it is quite fun. It's just like using embossing powder. The only difference is you can see through it because it's transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little rolled edge here, just using the end of my brush, and then of course I will distress the edges with my favorite, the Vintage Photo Distress Ink. And at this point I'm still just making essentially ephemera. I have no plan of action to put everything together. I'm just winging it. Quite funny, I just pulled out a butterfly. This is a metal piece, so I'm going to try this embossing dabber on the metal piece. And I have to tell you, be careful, it gets very hot because it's, metal. But I love the way that this turned out. The look of these transparent embossing glazes on top of the metal background is really spectacular. So that in itself is something that I know I'll do in the future. But just taking my tweezers, going to hold on to this, put my powder back, not to waste it, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat up that embossing powder right on that metal. So you'll see it change color here just a little bit, and voila, you can see right through it. It's quite pretty, that rust color. So it's a little hot. I'm just going to set it off to the side. I'm going to move on, do something else now. So I decided, let me go ahead and do a little cleanup here. I haven't got to those stamps just yet that I pulled out. So I figured, okay, I'm going to go ahead and try to use what I have, which are mostly browns in this distress embossing. So I said, let me pull out some boots and a guitar. And I'm going to go ahead and back those on a block. And then I have some white artisan cardstock there that I'm going to go ahead and use some archival ink. And no, I take that back. I'm using the Versamark fine ink. I'm going to go ahead and stamp that. In retrospect, I think I would have used a darker ink color to give it a more defined look for the boots especially. But, I'm playing around with these embossing glazes. So I dump that on there. And you can see if you're just looking for the outline, it's really nice. Okay. Do a little cleanup here again. And I'll set that aside and do my embossing heat gun on it. Okay. I started off with this little project, just pulling out a bunch of stuff from my stash, not having any idea whatsoever what path I was going down, and just decided I'll just wing it. I'll just go with it. After all, I'm just here to have fun with the things that I've purchased and make the most of it. So sorry about the table there wiggling. What I noticed here is that I think I didn't heat the embossing glaze all the way through, so my embossing pen was actually pulling in some of the color that I had put down, and I almost think I should have left it just like this, but I didn't. I went ahead and decided I was going to try to put a two-tone on this guitar, so I dumped glaze all over that again, and then off, and then it is what it is. So we just keep moving on, and do a little cleanup again here. So this is a back and forth process with these glazes, just to, not waste your material that you've used, but it doesn't take long. So you can see that just heating through, and then all of a sudden it is really shiny. So really nice. And say, what am I going to do? Okay, let me pull out a tag. I think I want to play around with something else. Let me put a sentiment here. I'm going to go ahead and stamp that on. And I decided I'm going to use that Uncharted Mariner again, mix it up. Okay. So I did that, just a little extra. I wasn't using my little tool that is essentially cornstarch to rub all over the paper to get rid of the static. So you could do that. I was lazy and didn't get it out. So here I am. Go ahead and heat that up again. Melt that. And this is just a craft tag. Basically like a manila folder cut down. And let's see, what am I going to do? I'm going to pull out a stencil here. All right, I decided I'm going to go ahead and use some Distress Texture Paste here. It's a matte paste, and I just used that little plastic spreading tool there and kind of push the paste down through the stencil, making sure just to wipe across and then lift up very gently, digging it out of that little hole. And I went ahead and set my stencil and that tool down in the water that I have next to my desk so that it doesn't dry on top of that stencil and make it unusable. But now I decided, okay, I'm going to do this technique. I'm just going to sprinkle stuff all over it. So one thing that you can do with this, if you're using any of the texture pastes, is put the glaze on it and then set it aside and let it dry. If you do that, then when you go ahead and then heat up and melt the embossing glaze, it's really just the embossing glaze that will react to the heat. But of course I didn't wait. So what you'll find is if you are impatient like I am, then when you heat it, that texture paste will also react, and in my case, it bubbles up. It's not bad. It's almost like a puffy paint from the 90s that I used to do with t-shirts and stuff. And I don't feel that it bothered me to look at it. But if you don't like the look, then, try something else. Let it dry. So you can see here, I'm thinking, oh boy, this is our typical, right? We start down a path and we're like, I really don't like the way that looks. But actually, as soon as I dumped off the excess off of that tag, I was pleasantly surprised with the way that it turned out. So it's my jam. I said, okay, I'm going to go with this. Let's keep moving. I have a little bit of blue in there, and then I have those other tones of oranges and reds, and just going to keep going. So I'm just trying to make sure that there is embossing powder all over every bit of that paste that I have on there. So I dump that off, and then I'm going to go ahead and hold on to this tag and go ahead and emboss. And if you look closely, you'll be able to see that little bit of bubbling of that texture paste as it kind of puffs up. But again, it's not crazy, and it didn't bother me. Really liking the way that looks. Putting that down. The only thing I don't like about it is the manila. So I want to put some other coloring on here to just give it a bit more of a vintage vibe, I'm thinking. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out some of my sprays, and here is my lovely splat box. You can see this thing is well loved. That's my little paper towel that I've obviously been using a few times. And go ahead and put my mica sprays is what I'm using, mica stains. So I give those a good shake. And some of these are new as well that I'm deciding to use. I said, oh, okay, let me pull out this color. So I actually pulled out one that is antiqued bronze. And then I also used the, Winter Frost color and I was liking the way that looked together with a little bit of brushed pewter. So just give it a little bit of a spritz there. And when I first spray this blue color, it's like, whoa, that's a lot of blue, but I like the way it looks in the end. So I give it a little bit of a spritz here. And you can see, ooh, that looks a little harsh. So I decided, okay, that's enough of that. Let me go ahead and get this water bottle and start spraying. What am I making is a mess. So I'm just going to go with it again. When I say it's pooling up. I need to get my heat gun out, not the embossing gun, but the heat gun, and start to let this sprays dry onto that paper, onto that manila tag. So I'm going to try to dump off that little bit of extra because it was a little bit too much for me. It was too dark, is what it was. I'll go ahead and spray some more water here. And I decided, oh, let me put this little fishy thing in there, and I'll get some mica stain on it too. Might as well use that pretty color. And then I'll use this wet wipe to kind of pick up some of the extra pooling that was there. But the shimmer is still left behind, and I really like the way that that looked. I do think it grunged it up quite well, and each layer just made it a bit more interesting is what I felt like. So if you're not someone that does a lot of grunge things, this was a really cool way, I felt like, just to let yourself experiment and pull something together. So this is a little art journal that I have, and I have been playing around with different techniques and kind of highlighting the things that I've been playing around with. And so, like I said, I had no rhyme or reason when I started this. So yeah, I have a butterfly, I have some flowers on a tag, and then I have some fish. And I just decided, well, it is all the same color family, so I'm going to go ahead and use it on my art journal. This is, again, to highlight the different techniques that I've been playing around with. So I'm just going to mush it together. It will work. We'll find a way to make it work. Here's a little clock that I made last year or the year before. Can't honestly remember. But I decided, okay, well, I'm making this for New Year's. Let's go ahead and use some of these decorations that I've previously made and have fun with it. So I'm going to smile. It's New Year's. Of course, I'm using some of this vintage photo ink along the edges here. And then I'm going to pull in my pot. And of course, I'm going to need some flowers on my pot. So then I'm trying to decide how am I going to put this darn butterfly that I only did half of it. Too white, way too white on the book. So here we go. Here's the splat. Not going to fit. What am I going to do here? Okay, let's use the stamp. I've had the stamp out. I'm going to mix it with some colors again. I'm going to pull out some of those archival inks pads. I'm going to mix in some blues and some oranges here together. And then I'm just going to press stamp right onto that journal page. I'm going to create my background. So I'm liking the way that looks, and do some off stamping. That's when you ink it up the first time and then you just stamp it again without re-inking it and just get a different tone to that look. So that's pretty bright there, and then I'll do some others off to the side. I figured, okay, that's good. And I want to work with that. I don't like it's not grungy enough. Let me put some additional color on here. I think I'm liking that a bit better. I think that butterfly will go to the top. And now for the left side, what am I going to do here? I'm going to use that metal piece. I'm going to tie those color themes together. And then I decided, trim. I need some trim. Let me pull out some trim that I have in my stash. And I like the look of this little thing, this little edging. So I'm going to go with that, like that. I'm going to use these little chipboard pieces somehow. going to do here, it's a red heart. Place that over aside. I play around with this second pot a little bit, and then I decided I don't like it. It's too heavy of a look. I prefer to use these other elements that I played around with. So I'm thinking the boots are too white. I need to do something. So let me play around with this crayon. Let me see if I can pull some of that in here. I think maybe the crayons might work. I have to play around with it a little bit more, but maybe they would work better with some watercolor paper. This is the White Artisan cardstock, which is fantastic for doing your mini albums and cards and paper crafting. But I think maybe the watercolor paper would work better with these crayons. So I'll have to continue messing around with that at a different time. But today is all about the embossing glaze. So I'm just going to do some quick fussy cutting, and I will distress the edges here, my boots, a little extra color there, and I think I like that a little bit better. But again, the tones are too similar with that pot. Don't think I'm going to use that red rose. We'll be having to stretch that out a little bit because I cut it a little bit short, but that's okay. Just fussing around with it. How do I want it to look? And do you guys do this? Do you mess around with everything that you've put in there that you've worked on to try to see how the heck can this fit together? I do this with my 12 by 12 layouts as well. Just takes a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and just cut this out. And then, of course, I'm going to give it some inking as well. Okay, got to figure out a way to use that. A little bit of shape, and decide, that's also too white of a background. So what am I going to do? I'm going to find another stamp, and I'm going to stamp that background. But I had also pulled out these plastic pieces from my stash, and they're little buttons, but they're little clocks and gears, and so I'm just going to use that in there to kind of tie the whole theme together. At this point, what's turning into a theme anyhow, New Year's. So I pull a little text out, background stamp, go ahead and use my archival black ink and start stamping away. So a little dab and a little stamp, a little here, a little there. Start going a little crazy with it. Want some on the bottom, want some on the corner. You know, it kind of starts looking like, oh, is that a little much? I don't know. Just a little bit more won't hurt. Do it again. You know, you start guessing yourself, but you can't. You just got to keep going. So then I pulled out another stamp, so flower. I'm also using my black archival ink, though, for this, because it's just for texture, really. It's just something to change that stark white background that I was dealing with before. So now that I have something on the background, I'm liking that a lot better. And what am I going to go with next? Some more color. I want to bring some more color in. So I'm going to pull out my splat box again. And I'm going to go ahead and spray some of that mica spray back onto it. It's mica stain. That's a winter frost color. And a little bit of that antique bronze color. And I'll use my heat tool here. Just make sure to dry that. A little bit more. That's the antique bronze. Doesn't it just look like some sprayed mess right now? It sure does from this vantage point. Well, we're going to keep going. Remember, this is just playtime. giving yourself the freedom to just play with your tools and your goodies. You bought them to use them, so use them. That's what I have to tell myself a lot of times. So here we are. It'll tone down with the things that I'm going to place on top of it. But now at least I have some color on these backgrounds. So now I can start placing my items. And I'm going to use this stamp. I pulled out one of my old wood block stamps. Where do I want to place it? I'm trying to figure that out. Again with the pot. Trying to figure out the pot again. Still not grungy enough. Do it some more. Keep going, keep going. It's just playing and playing and playing. Not dark enough. This is where I was feeling like I should have used a different color for the stamp itself of those boots so that it was further defined. So I pulled out some of my black soot distress ink, and I was trying to give some darker color around the edges to those boots. So there, I finally got rid of the pot for that left side and decided, okay, this one's going to go here. I'm going to go ahead and put my butterfly up at that top corner. Want the pot at an angle? No, I want the pot straight. Okay. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open my glue here. This is my art glitter glue, and I'm going to start committing myself. So put that pot down. Use that chipboard piece. Put those boots down. I think I want to tuck that behind. So I'm going to pull those boots back up. Go ahead and glue that little guitar down. Pulling some of that orange color onto this page. And then I'll glue back my boots. Okay, the fish are kind of just hiding in the background there. Want that little heart to just peek out and kind of overlay. I want one thing to touch the other here. Give it some feeling. That would have looked good, but I didn't go with it. I didn't want to just put the craft cardstock down, and it was getting late, so I wanted to get something accomplished here. So just kept going here, glue this down, committing to it. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull out some more ink here and one of these ephemera pieces from the paper collection from Country Craft Creations, which is the New Year's collection, and it is called Midnight Kiss. Came out last year. So I pulled out one of those. It has a clock on it as well. And I'm just going to continue layering here. Use some of that black ink that I have to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to stamp. I'm going to use some of these layers that I've made the ruffles in the past. You can check out my channel for that. And by the way, if you're seeing this and you're enjoying this process video, give it a thumbs up. And if you would, that helps my channel. Check out Country Craft Creations for a lot of the goodies that I'm using here to make this. And become a subscriber. Thank you for joining me on this process video. I hope that you're enjoying this New Year's crop. And I look forward to seeing some of your crafts in the future. If you're not part of the Scrapbookers of Country Craft Creations Facebook page, it's a wonderful place to be a part of. It's a really nice crafting community. It's free to join. There are plenty of tutorials that are done by the design team, and a bunch of wonderful women that put together a lot of crafty items for you to take part of. So I hope that you have enjoyed this, and until next time, everyone, happy crafting. Bye.